the childlike wonder that we lose so often in our older years that I hope we all find again and that we get back. And so, yes, it can be destabilizing, and there is fear around that because we like to have concrete answers. But I would argue that our identity is often just a mask, it's a protection mechanism, right? And so much of who we are is always shifting and changing. It's always shifting and changing. If we are open to seeing that, then we can really grow and change with it. And so, allowing ourselves to experience the world with fresh eyes and with wonder is a beautiful gift that will keep us young and true to ourselves. And I also invite people, look back at what kind of things you like to do when you were young. Like, what interested you? What fascinated you? What kind of art did you like to create? What instruments were you drawn to? Did you want to dance? Did you want to sing? Do those things now, because that will awaken something in you that is very true to your essence.
Welcome to Normalize the Conversation by Inspiring My Generation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter. Today's guest is Sheleana Aiyana, bestselling author Becoming the One and founder of Rising Women, a community of over 2.5 million people. Through her poetic and practical teachings, Sheleana guides people through heartbreak, trauma healing, and the journey of self-reclamation. Her work is rooted in lived experience, somatic wisdom, and a deep devotion to love as a spiritual path. In today's conversation, we're diving into childhood wounds, attachment patterns, nervous system regulation, and how our earliest experiences can impact the way we love, trust, and show up in relationships as adults. We talk about inner child healing beyond the buzzwords, why some of us crave closeness while simultaneously pushing people away, and how learning to pause instead of react can completely change the way we navigate emotions, conflict, and connection. We also explore self-worth, healing survival patterns, and how reconnecting with joy, curiosity, and even childlike wonder can help us feel more like ourselves again. So join us for a conversation around healing, relationships, and learning to come home to yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
I am a little bit tired and feeling good.
It's one of those days for me where it's balancing between feeling good and feeling tired and not allowing the tired to consume how I see the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. And, there's different phases of life and also different phases of the day, and sometimes you just need to go with that, and other times you just don't have the option. So it's just about taking those little moments where you can to give yourself what you need. It's really grounded in research too, that being immersed in nature is going to be supportive for us, but we've gotten quite far from that. We've strayed from that quite a lot, but it is important. And when you look at the way that the hormones change and the blood sugar changes and the heart rate changes when you just go out into the forest for a little while, it's significant, and it makes a big difference in our ability to tap back into our own senses and to trust our instincts and just hear ourselves again.
Yeah, it really helped for me start to feel more present, and especially sitting on the ground, because as a kid, I loved to sit in the grass. I finally was starting to listen to not just the negative thoughts and the intrusive thoughts and the fears, but what was underneath them for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, being grounded, being connected to the earth, being able to just totally connect can be life-changing. And I really recommend to people that they do it on a regular basis, get out into nature without your phone, without your headphones, without your music, and just be.
Without the music's a really hard one for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you like to listen to music while you're out walking?
I do. I always
I'm really trying to learn to calm the thoughts in my brain and not have to have something going to be able to not have all the intrusive thoughts happening. I'm so much in my head that if there's not other sound to block it out, I start to spiral in all these things that aren't good enough about me, or why is this happening? And it's so learning that I don't need sound all the time to escape. I need to actually learn to sit with it and explore underneath it.
Well, and even to just take in the natural soundscape too, like the sound of birds is really, really healing for our brains. It can have a significant impact on our well-being and our health. And there's lots to listen to. It's just not quite as stimulating, perhaps. And sometimes just moving, you don't have to necessarily be completely still if that feels like too much. But what would it be like to just go out into nature and go for a walk without your headphones, or to, go dip your feet in a cold river and let the soundscape of the river permeate your senses, and take in that natural stimulation of the natural world.
And then even sitting at the beach on the sand, actually hearing the ocean and the waves, and how happy it made me, and how it brought me back to times where I was collecting seashells with my grandmother on the beach instead of being so consumed by what was happening inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, distractions. There are plenty of them.
Yeah, I'm so good at leaning into them. So going to one thing that I really, really want to talk about is inner child work. Really beginning to understand has always been something my brain very much struggles with. And so can you talk a little bit about those early wounds and how you began to explore it within yourself?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people come to this work because they're at a crisis point, right? Like most of us don't come to inner child work or come to healing our wounds just on a regular Sunday afternoon. It tends to be at the result of a crisis point, or something big in our lives falling apart, or everything falling apart. And that was true for me. It was many of my old wounds and stories and traumas all rising to the surface all at once. And I was in the middle of a divorce in my 20s to a person who really I should never have married. And it was more of like an arrangement for us than it was really a marriage. And I just remember feeling as though I might die, honestly, from the amount of pain that I was in. And I just went down the rabbit hole. I began doing medicine ceremonies and breath work and transpersonal therapy and shadow work and mother and father wound work. And I was just doing it all because I had to, in order to stay afloat and to keep myself here, because the grief that I was in was so immense that I just didn't think that I could survive it. And so doing the work was my lifeline. And part of that was the realization that I was responsible for my life and that I was in charge of what happened next. And that gave me a sense of power in my life, where it didn't matter who left or who hurt me or who did what. It was up to me to make change in order to feel better, and that meant that I could feel better. And so I just went fully into it. And it was a really intense and transformative, beautiful process that, led me here. And I will say, the journey of meeting our inner child is almost never done, because we go through various stages in life, right? Like you're a young woman right now. I don't know, you don't have children yet, do you?
No.
Right. So you're going to go through all of these different phases, right, of what happens when we're initiated into parenthood and what comes up for us then, and then what happens when we go into perimenopause and then menopause and what initiates then. And there's these different markers in our lives that bring new material up for us to look at. And it's sort of a bit like peeling of an onion and like peeling back those layers of self until we get back to that essence, which is the core of who we are and and the truth of who we are. And what I'm most excited about in that is the truth of your creativity and the truth of your innate gifts in the world that you were born here with. And that doesn't mean that you're here to change the world, or, you know, everyone here has to do something huge with their lives, but I believe everyone is here to love and to let love in and to be creative, as the human spirit is meant to be creative.
Was it hard to dive into all of it? I was so scared to sit there and say, well, maybe I also contributed to this. It's so much easier to hold on to this idea that everyone else did this to me. I never thought about the aspect of I can also do something for myself and help myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And there's sort of different temperaments, right? And some of us lean more toward the victim, where we see everything through a lens of collapse. And we see everything through a lens of victimhood, where we do feel very powerless. And I will say, too, that there is room for righteous anger. And taking responsibility for your own life and for your role in your story does not dissolve or permit anyone else to cross your boundaries or be shitty to you. That's not really what it is, to take responsibility for your own life, or to say, hey, yeah, I play a role in my story. Other people's behavior is up to them, and how they treat you is really a reflection of what they have going on internally as well. But how you respond for what happens in your life and how you react is due to your own conditioning, your own belief systems, your own wiring, and you do have the power to shift that, and you do have the power to work with it. And that doesn't mean that you have to do it alone, and you shouldn't ever have to do it alone. And especially when we're struggling with mental health issues, one of the most important things is that you actually allow yourself to be supported, but in a way that feels nourishing and uplifting, rather than rescuing and grasping. So if you're coming at somebody to support you in a rescuing and grasping energy, you are coming to them in a powerless state. You're saying, I don't have any power in my own life to help myself feel better, to support myself, to make decisions, to love myself. So I'm going to need you to save me to do that, right? So we're looking at the other person to save, fix, rescue us, make us feel better, make all of our pain go away. That doesn't work very well, right? That's a grasping energy. Versus when we come to somebody and we're in a place of self-responsibility, we're letting people support us and knowing that we don't have to do it all alone, without giving our power away to them and assuming that it's on them to fix us. We know that relationship is a mutual, reciprocal dynamic where we give and receive, and there may not be balance at all times, but there is reciprocity.
I go back and forth between I need someone to rescue me and make this feel better, and then the point of I don't need anyone. No one's going to come and rescue me, so I have to figure this out on my own. How do you begin to shift to be able to find that healthier relationship instead of save me or get away from me?
Well, first I want to speak to what that is, right? That's your attachment system really speaking through you. And so there's wisdom in that. And so when you said, I have a hard time contacting my inner child, I want to point you right there. That is your inner child speaking. The come close and get away from me is essentially your inner child saying, I don't know what it means to trust love, and I don't know what it means to have stable, reliable protection, support, and understanding, right? So if we look back, I don't know what your history is, but was there always a consistent warmth of feeling seen, heard, and understood? Or was there a quality of inconsistency, of perhaps hot and cold energy, right?
Yeah,
and so
hot.
When we look back, very hot and cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so that's your attachment system speaking that out. saying, this is what I expect because this was what I was conditioned with. So I want you to come close, but I also don't trust you. And so I'm going to push you away. And so working with that energy, really having compassion for where that comes from, tuning in, that's your nervous system saying, like, this is my baseline. And so you can slowly begin to work with your nervous system and with your own senses when that's happening to slow down and pause and then choose a reaction or a response rather than a reaction. Does that make sense?
It does, being able to choose a response instead of reaction, because it's so easy to react. Like, I want love, but I don't trust you. I don't trust it. I've created that narrative, and so it makes me feel really disconnected from people. And then I tell myself I'm all alone.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like for you in your history when you had relationships that meant a lot to you? How did those relationships usually go?
A lot of the people would leave. Like my parents, my dad, I loved going to work with him. I loved to sit there and watch him. I'd even hide under his desk to be part of meetings. I loved being there. And then they got divorced and he wasn't there anymore for a while. And that felt so really sad. And then my grandparents, my whole world, and then my grandfather passes. And suddenly I feel very confused on where I belong in the world, because that's where I always was. So I think for me, it's just this idea that everyone's going to leave. Everyone leaves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you say that, what does it feel like in your body?
My heart is racing.
Yeah, right. So let's just be with that for a minute, right? Notice your heart racing. Notice what other sensation is present. And then can you shift to a place in your body that feels more pleasant, more neutral? You just scan for a moment and see if there's anywhere in your body that feels a little bit more relaxed.
My hands feel more relaxed, my arms.
Nice. And so just giving all of your attention and your awareness to your hands and to your arms, and then bringing that sensation of ease and relaxation, spreading it throughout the rest of your body. And I want to show you something too. Take your right hand and just tuck it under your left armpit, and then wrap your left arm around and just gently give it a little squeeze, like a nice little hug. This is called a self hug. And just notice what happens in your nervous system as you really drop into that sensation of giving yourself a hug. Really allow it fully.
I feel a lot calmer in my chest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what we just did is an example of how we can begin to notice what's happening inside when we're activated, right? Even just talking about something can activate us. So in relationship, we're getting activated all the time. So now we can start to notice, oh, my heart is racing, or my breath is tensing, or my hands are clenched. What is that? Where is that? Can I be with that for a moment? So we're widening our capacity to actually be with that uncomfortable sensation for a moment, rather than trying to eject out of our bodies, trying to blame, trying to attack, trying to run. We're just going to be with it just for a moment. And then we titrate into something that feels more pleasant, feels more relaxed, feels a little bit more gentle. And then we can begin to shift that. And so that's us learning how to tune into our own dysregulation and bring ourselves back. And so these are these little micro moments where we get to practice creating a pause. And the pause is everything when it comes to understanding our role in our relationships, understanding what's happening for us inside, and being able to choose a different way. The biggest piece of not being able to do that is that we are so uncomfortable being with the uncomfortable feelings and the sensations, that we have to react immediately because we want to get rid of them. So if you're just able to create just a pause, practice holding it for a moment, and then shift into a different state, then you are beginning to build that muscle of self-awareness and the capacity to respond rather than react.
And that's so simple that you can do with yourself.
And, you can, at first, you can practice just saying, you know what, I need to take a moment for me. Instead of storming out, you just say, I need to take a moment, and then you go and do that. It changes the quality of the experience completely for the other person and the respect for the relationship. And, this is really, really common. We all have our own patterns. And when we feel like we aren't able to find our center or calm in the presence of another person, it's because historically it wasn't safe to do that. We don't actually know what it feels like to co-regulate with another nervous system that is safe and warm and loving. But if you want to experience that, then you have to slowly inch your way there by practicing being vulnerable and showing up in those hard moments for yourself, and also just verbalizing, hey, this is what I need, or this is what I'm experiencing. I'm going to take a moment. And then slowly but surely, you might find that you're able to just be with it in the moment, notice what's happening for you, notice what's arising, and then voice it to, whoever you're in conversation with. And then have actually a need that you can voice to them, right? You can begin to actually share what I actually need right now, or something that I want right now. And then you can start to invite in support where you're in relationship, not just when things are good, but also when things are hard.
Yeah. The idea of communicating, to basically admit to someone that I'm not okay in this moment, for me feels terrifying, because I was told to grow up, get over it, yelled at for having any emotion, not being able to work through it in that very second. So to even communicate sounds, how do you begin to get more comfortable with being able to vocalize or learn statements that you can say when it's not very easy to be able to admit it to someone else?
You have to practice with people who are safe. The hardest thing to do when you come from a history like that, where there was no modeling of healthy communication, is to try and practice in a relationship that is really volatile. Now, most of us end up there anyways, but it's really helpful to practice dialoguing in a healthy way with friends, and maybe in a women's group, or with a therapist, or somebody that is able to show up for you and support you, and rewriting that dynamic. And, that's really, what our early childhood is supposed to be us learning, this is how to communicate, this is how to share our needs, this is how to be in relationship. And unfortunately, the way that we learned was usually through avoidance or chaos or conflict. And so a lot of us came out having to try to figure it out for ourselves. And it's tough, but it's not impossible. How old are you?
27.
Yeah. So, you're also just about to go into a Saturn return in like the next 1 to 3 years, depending on what your chart looks like. And that in itself is such a beautiful opportunity to begin to evaluate some of the conditions that you grew up in and the belief systems that you sort of took on that maybe don't belong to you anymore, that you want to put to bed. And what are some of those new ways of being and rituals and ways of relating that you want to bring with you into the next chapter.
Yeah. At the same time, being able to let go of old narratives, especially things that separating out what was put onto me and told to me and what I actually want, think, feel, and believe. How do I want to take care of myself? Where do I want to live? When I moved from Florida to California alone, that was completely terrifying. It was the first time I was making a real decision for myself. It's been so hard to separate from this is who you are to who am I?
And what an exciting time. You get to experience the world through fresh eyes, and you get to bring curiosity to everything that you try and everything that you do, and you get to be completely open to loving and learning new things. and it gets to be a continuous adventure. And I think that's actually the childlike wonder that we lose so often in our older years, that I hope we all find again and that we get back. And so, yes, it can be destabilizing, and there is fear around that because we like to have concrete answers. But I would argue that our identity is often just a mask. It's a protection mechanism, right? And so much of who we are is always shifting and changing. It's always shifting and changing. If we are open to seeing that, then we can really grow and change with it. And so allowing ourselves to experience the world with fresh eyes and with wonder is a beautiful gift that will keep us young and true to ourselves. And I also invite people, look back at what kind of things you like to do when you were young. Like, what interested you? What fascinated you? What kind of art did you like to create? What instruments were you drawn to? Did you want to dance? Did you want to sing? Do those things now, because that will awaken something in you that is very true to your essence.
I was talking about this recently with someone, how I feel like so young, I was forced to grow up so fast. All of these ideas that were supposed to be fun times were turned into, you need to figure this all out now. 12 years old, they're asking, what do you want to be for the rest of your life? And taking away all these things that were joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I often people ask me, what's it like to be a mother? And I have a very fierce, wild-spirited daughter. And I always say, it's a lot like trying to domesticate a wild animal without killing their essence, without killing their spirit. And for me, it's always been very abundantly clear that we are born who we are. We are born with our essence. And the greatest job of a parent is really just to preserve that essence and to protect it, not to shape or mold or change our children or make them who they're meant to be. They're already here as they're meant to be. And so often that spirit gets crushed, and even unintentionally. Parenting is hard. Being a kid is hard. It's all hard. But if we can work at it, then we get to a point where maybe we don't have to go back and do so much of that excavation. But a lot of us do, and that's okay too. And so it's not even so much going backward as it is moving through whatever it is that you need to move through in order to find the truth for you. And ultimately, the truth really should just lead you to a path of contentment and joy. Of course, not always. You're going to have hard times. Life is hard and painful sometimes. But what do we do all of this work for? It's not so that we can be endlessly poring over our past wounds and processing everything. It's actually just so that we can enjoy life, right? And so the more free you are to play and laugh and have a good time and just be an adventurer in your own life, the more free you are in your psyche, in your body, in your expression. And that's what I think it's all for anyways.
Yeah. I really love that. One thing that I've learned was the importance of accepting the past. That's what happened. And then being able to just not be fighting it all the time. I always want to fight what happened, fight what I went through, and think that somehow it's going to change. And I end up a lot in these arguments with my parents, who I love so much, but a lot of times we butt heads, I'm going to say. And, a lot of times their response is, well, that's what my parents did. That's what my parents did. So now I'm curious, listening to you, what has that been like to go through your own journey? And now as a parent, beginning to break cycles. A lot of people get stuck in, well, this is what I was taught. This is what I experienced. So this is what I'm going to do now as a parent. What was that like for you?
I think because of who I am and the way that I'm designed, that's never really a narrative for me. My narrative is always of challenging the constructs that I have been given. It's of challenging the beliefs that I've been fed, or the way that it's supposed to be done. And I really encourage everybody to open their minds and ask questions, and like, why do I do it this way? Why do I think this way? Why does this feel true to me? Or does it just sound true because that's what I've been told? And so inviting us back into the body, into the senses. And this is what I've noticed too, is we look at, for example, our parents' generation and their parents' generation. A lot of them use that narrative. And the reason that that narrative works so well is because they're operating in the head and not in the body. Right? Because think about it like this. If you don't have access to the internet and you don't have access to new information that could possibly alert you to the way that you're doing things, it's not working or it's harmful, the only other way to know is to have an intrinsic awareness. Something has to come alive in you and alert you that way. But if you're not in your body because you're frozen, you're numb, you're disassociated, you're avoidant, you're in your trauma, you're going to be thinking from the head and not feeling from the heart. So you're not going to feel that sensation that tells you this doesn't feel right, something's off here. You're going to be thinking, well, this is how it's always done. And so inviting us back into our senses, into our instincts, into our wildness allows us to trust that inner knowing. And on a primal biological level, we are wired for connection, not separation. And so in tune with our senses and in our bodies, it's impossible to ignore. It's really easy to ignore it if we're not in our bodies.
I feel like I'm always disconnected. I've always felt so disconnected from my body because I was so consumed in my mind. I never thought about the previous generations disconnecting, dissociating, doing what you can to make through. It has to be so hard. But now we have that ability to really check in with ourselves. What's a way to start to begin to feel safe enough to go inward?
So there's a few practices. One is the one that I mentioned in the very beginning, right? So take yourself on a nature date once a week without music. You can bring your phone if you need it for emergencies, but you shouldn't be checking your phone. Put it on airplane mode, put it away. Go out into nature, take your shoes off if you can, get barefoot, and just connect. Notice that. The other piece is observing your mind, and I have a section on this in my book, Becoming the One. Observing your mind, learning to challenge your own thoughts, learning to question your own beliefs. So when you do something or you say something, ask yourself why. Do a little bit of inquiry there. And that's really the first step, is bringing curiosity to your own way of being, and then giving yourself time and presence to just drop in and start to notice what it feels like to be with you again.
Especially the curiosity part, because it's so easy to be afraid to ask questions, especially for ourselves, and want to understand deeper. Stay curious.
I think it's one of the most beautiful gifts you can give yourself throughout your entire life, is to die curious.
I love that. All right. So as we are wrapping up, how can people connect with you? You're founder of Rising Woman. How can people learn more about you, your work, your book, your journal, all of it?
I am on Instagram at Rising Woman, and I also have a new podcast on YouTube at Rising Woman. You can get on my email list, which is a great way to stay in touch. So go to risingwoman.com. I have free meditations. I have a Healing Your Inner Child meditation, Get Over Your Ex meditation, beautiful free gifts that you can download, and then you'll be on my list. And I can tell you about events that I have coming up or workshops. And then all of my books are obviously on Amazon, and then in major bookstores, and I have a few more coming out this year and next year. So thank you so much for having me, for your insights and your vulnerability and your questions. And I hope that this conversation was valuable to you and to your listeners.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation bringing education and awareness to the forefront and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.